The Texas panhandle had endured 6 months of unrelenting drought by the summer of 1879, but nothing could have prepared Rebecca Caldwell for what she would discover near the dry creek bed behind her homestead on that blistering August morning. What began as a simple gesture of kindness would ignite a series of events that would forever alter her understanding of courage, dignity, and the profound connections that can emerge between people from worlds that rarely intersect peacefully. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drought had persisted for half a year when Rebecca Caldwell first noticed the tiny footprints in the dust near the dried-up creek behind her property. At 28, she had grown accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life in the Texas panhandle, managing her family's homestead alone since influenza had claimed her husband, Michael, and their young son just 14 months earlier. The 200-acre property lay in a small valley where Cottonwood Creek had once flowed year-round, providing reliable water for crops and livestock. Now only cracked mud and scattered rocks remained where clear water had once flowed abundantly. Rebecca's daily routine began in the pre-dawn darkness, before the Texas sun transformed the landscape into a furnace that made midday work nearly impossible. She would tend to her remaining chickens, check on her withering garden that yielded fewer vegetables with each passing week, and operate the temperamental well pump that produced less water each day. The isolation had become a familiar companion, interrupted only by monthly trips to the small settlement of Palo Duro Springs, some 20 miles away, or the occasional visit from traveling peddlers brave enough to venture this far from established trails. The Caldwell homestead reflected Michael's practical nature and Rebecca's determination to honor his memory through perseverance. The sturdy 2-room cabin built from local stone and timber, hauled from the distant Palo Duro Canyon, stood resilient against the fierce windstorms that regularly swept across the plains. A covered porch provided precious shade during the sweltering afternoons, while the kitchen garden, now mostly barren earth, occupied the space between the house and the weathered barn. Behind these structures, a root cellar dug deep into a small hillside stored what remained of their preserved food, while a small smokehouse stood empty, waiting for better times when meat might again be plentiful enough to preserve. The well painstakingly dug by Michael during their first year had once produced sweet, clear water that had convinced them to establish their claim on this particular piece of land. Now it barely yielded enough for basic survival, requiring careful rationing that left Rebecca constantly thirsty and her remaining livestock visibly suffering. The economic situation throughout the territory had deteriorated along with the weather. Crop failures meant that even families with modest savings found themselves struggling to purchase basic necessities at inflated prices. The railroad, still 40 miles away, had promised prosperity but had yet to deliver any meaningful benefits to remote homesteaders like Rebecca. Rebecca's own financial resources had dwindled to almost nothing. The modest inheritance from her parents back in Tennessee had been invested in equipment and supplies during their first hopeful years. The sale of most of their cattle last autumn had provided temporary relief, but those funds were nearly depleted. Without rain soon, she would face the agonizing choice between abandoning the claim that represented everything she and Michael had worked for or staying to face starvation alongside the land itself. The isolation weighed as heavily on her spirit as her circumstances. Michael had been her anchor in this vast landscape, his quiet strength and unwavering faith making even the hardest days bearable. His death, followed so quickly by their sons, had left not only practical challenges, but an emotional void that the endless silence of the prairie seemed to magnify rather than soothe. Letters from her sister in St. Louis arrived infrequently, always urging her to abandon this foolish frontier experiment and return to civilization, where a woman of your education and sensibilities belongs. Yet something deep within Rebecca rebelled against surrender. Perhaps it was the stubborn determination inherited from her Welsh grandfather, or maybe the knowledge that Michael had believed so completely in their dream of building something meaningful from nothing. Whatever the source, she found herself clinging to the land with fierce determination, even as the rational voice in her mind whispered that retreat might be the wiser course. The Comanche tribes that had once moved freely through the region now existed under increasing pressure from federal authorities, determined to confine them to designated reservations. While the major conflicts had ended, tensions remained high as some bands continued to resist confinement, while others reluctantly adapted to reservation life. Rebecca's knowledge of tribal affairs came primarily through second-hand accounts, from travelers and the occasional newspaper that found its way to Palo Duro Springs. These sources often emphasize sensational conflicts rather than providing nuanced understanding of the complex human situations unfolding across the territory. Her own encounters with Native Americans had been limited to brief, cautious interactions. During trading expeditions to larger settlements, where tribal members sometimes appeared to exchange goods with merchants, these encounters had always been conducted under the watchful eyes of local authorities and had revealed little about the people, whose ancestors had called this land home for countless generations before white settlers arrived. The heat that August had been unlike anything in Rebecca's experience, even after 3 years on the frontier. Temperatures regularly climbed above 100 degrees, while the absence of rain had transformed the once vibrant grasslands into a brown wasteland where even the hardiest native plants struggled to survive. The few trees along the creek bed had shed their leaves early, standing like skeletal sentinels, grim reminders of better times. Dust devils danced across the barren fields while the western horizon shimmered with heat mirages that created cruel illusions of water where none existed. Her animals suffered visibly under these conditions. The milk cow that had once provided dairy products now gave barely enough milk for Rebecca's own needs. The chickens had nearly stopped laying altogether, spending their days panting in whatever shade they could find. Even her horse, a sturdy gelding named Samson that had been Michael's pride, showed signs of the stress that affected all living things in the territory. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Water conservation had become an obsession that governed every aspect of daily life. Rebecca collected every drop from the reluctant well, using it first for drinking, then for cooking, and finally for the most essential cleaning tasks before giving the remainder to her animals. Bathing had become a luxury reserved for Saturday evenings, when she would heat a small amount of water and wash with the efficiency of someone who understood that waste could mean death. Food stores were equally critical. The garden's failure meant relying entirely on preserved goods purchased during better times or acquired through careful trade with traveling merchants. Cornmeal, beans, and dried beef formed the foundation of meals that provided sustenance without variety or pleasure. The root cellar held perhaps 6 weeks' worth of supplies, assuming careful rationing and no unexpected emergencies. The psychological toll of constant scarcity affected Rebecca in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sleep came fitfully in the stifling heat, while dreams often featured the abundance they had enjoyed during their first hopeful years. Michael's presence haunted quiet moments, his voice seeming to echo in the wind that moved through the empty spaces where his laughter had once filled their modest home. Their son's face appeared in dreams so vivid that waking brought fresh grief each morning. Yet Rebecca had developed coping strategies that helped maintain her sanity along with her physical survival. She read and reread the few books they had brought from Tennessee, finding comfort in familiar stories that transported her imagination beyond current circumstances. A journal begun shortly after the funerals provided an outlet for thoughts and feelings that had no other audience in her isolated existence. Letters when she could afford paper and postage, connected her to the outside world and reminded her that life continued beyond the boundaries of her drought-stricken claim. Her sister's correspondence, while often critical of her choices, nonetheless provided news of family and childhood friends that helped maintain her sense of belonging to a larger human community. The practical skills she had acquired through necessity would have amazed her former self. The protected young woman who had married Michael with romantic notions about frontier adventure. She could now repair harness leather, diagnose animal ailments, preserve food through multiple methods, and manage the complex calculations required for successful farming. These capabilities provided confidence that partially offset the loneliness and uncertainty that characterized her daily existence. Most importantly, Rebecca had discovered reserves of inner strength that she hadn't known she possessed. Each crisis overcome, each difficult decision made independently, each small success achieved through her own efforts, contributed to a growing sense of self-reliance that transformed what others might see as hardship into a form of hard-won independence. Her relationship with the land itself had evolved from romantic appreciation to practical understanding based on daily interaction with its moods and challenges. She could read weather signs with accuracy that rivaled longtime residents, predict seasonal changes from subtle indicators, and identify the plants and animals that shared her environment. This knowledge, acquired through observation and necessity rather than formal education, connected her to the prairie in ways that transcended mere ownership of legal documents. The morning when everything changed began like countless others. Before it, Rebecca rose in the pre-dawn darkness, grateful for the few degrees of coolness that night provided. She dressed quickly in the practical clothing that had replaced the feminine attire of her earlier life, moved through her abbreviated morning routine, and stepped outside to face another day of managing scarcity while hoping for the rain that refused to come. The air hung still and heavy with the promise of another scorching day. No breeze stirred the dust or provided even momentary relief from the oppressive heat that would soon make outdoor work impossible. The eastern horizon showed the first pale hints of sunrise that would bring temperatures climbing toward levels that tested human endurance. Rebecca's first task involved checking the well, a daily ritual that had become increasingly discouraging. As water levels continued dropping, the pump required more effort each day to produce smaller amounts of increasingly murky liquid that nonetheless represented the difference between survival and catastrophe. She filled her water buckets with careful attention to every drop, knowing that waste was a luxury she couldn't afford. The chickens emerged from their coop with obvious reluctance, seeking shade immediately rather than foraging for food in ground, too hard and barren to support the insects they preferred. Their distress mirrored her own as she scattered the small amount of grain she could spare, watching them compete listlessly for sustenance that barely maintained life. Samson stood motionless in the corral's only shaded corner, his coat dull, and his ribs showing despite Rebecca's efforts to provide adequate feed. The gelding's condition worried her constantly, as he represented not only companionship, but also her primary means of transportation to Palo Duro Springs for supplies and her only quick escape should danger threaten. It was while carrying water to Samson that Rebecca first noticed the small footprints in the dust near the dry creek bed. The marks were clearly human, but far too small to have been made by any adult. The size suggested a child, though what child would be wandering alone in such desolate country seemed impossible to imagine. The prints appeared fresh, made sometime during the night when the dust would have been slightly damp with what little dew the drought permitted. Creating and narrating this story took us a lot of time and effort. If you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us. Now back to Rebecca's discovery. Rebecca studied the tracks with growing puzzlement and concern. They showed bare feet, unusual for any white child in such harsh conditions, and followed a path that suggested careful, deliberate movement rather than casual wandering. The person who made them had clearly been trying to avoid detection moving close to the creek bed where shadows would provide concealment. Following the trail, Rebecca discovered that the footprints led to a small hollow beneath an overhanging rock where the creek had once carved into the bank. The area provided some protection from both sun and wind, creating a natural shelter that someone seeking concealment might choose. Disturbed dust and flattened grass indicated that someone had indeed spent time there, possibly several hours based on the extent of the disturbance. More troubling were signs that whoever had been there was in desperate condition. Scattered plant remnants suggested someone had been attempting to find anything edible, while marks in the dirt indicated digging with bare hands, possibly searching for roots or burrowing insects. Several small bones from what appeared to be a field mouse lay nearby, suggesting that hunger had driven someone to desperate measures. Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities. No white families lived within walking distance, and traveling parties always followed established roads rather than approaching homesteads through the back country. The military rarely moved through their area except on major campaigns, and those involved large groups rather than solitary individuals. The most likely explanation, though it carried implications she preferred not to contemplate, was that the visitor had been a Native American child, possibly separated from their group and facing starvation. The realization created a complex mixture of emotions. Compassion demanded that she help anyone in such obvious distress, regardless of their background or circumstances. Yet practical considerations whispered warnings about the dangers of involving herself in situations she didn't fully understand. Federal authorities took a dim view of unauthorized contact between settlers and tribal members, while some neighbors would interpret such assistance as disloyalty to white interests. More immediately troubling was the question of where the person might be now. The track seemed to end at the shelter site, with no clear indication of departure direction. If someone was still hiding nearby, watching her activities, the situation required careful handling that balanced caution with humanitarian concern. Rebecca's decision, when it came, reflected values that had guided her through every crisis since Michael's death. Regardless of potential complications, she couldn't ignore evidence of human suffering when she possessed the means to provide help. The amount of food required to sustain one desperate child wouldn't significantly impact her own survival prospects, while the moral cost of callous indifference would poison her conscience forever. Moving with deliberate casualness to avoid alarming anyone who might be watching, Rebecca returned to her cabin and prepared a simple meal of cornbread, dried beans, and water. The portions were generous by her current rationing standards, but modest enough not to create suspicion if observed by passing travelers. She wrapped the food carefully in clean cloth, added a small jug of precious water, and carried the bundle back to the creek bed as though conducting routine chores. At the shelter site, Rebecca placed the food package in a position where it would be easily visible to anyone returning to the location. She added no note or verbal message, understanding that such communications might create more problems than they solved. The gesture would speak for itself to anyone desperate enough to appreciate its significance. The rest of that day passed with unusual tension as Rebecca found herself constantly aware of the creek area. Her normal routine felt artificial and strained, performed for an audience she couldn't see but suspected was watching. Every small sound caused her to pause and listen, wondering if her mysterious visitor had returned to discover her offering. By evening, when she conducted her final check of the animals, the food package had disappeared. No new footprints were visible in the hard-packed earth, but the clean removal of every crumb suggested someone had indeed accepted her help with the gratitude of genuine hunger. The cloth lay folded neatly beside the water jug, a small gesture of courtesy that confirmed her visitor possessed manners despite desperate circumstances. That night, Rebecca lay awake longer than usual, listening for sounds that might indicate the presence of someone seeking shelter near her buildings. Knowledge that she was no longer completely alone in the vast prairie landscape brought both comfort and anxiety. Someone trusted her enough to accept help, but someone was also watching her activities with unknown intentions. The second morning brought fresh evidence of nocturnal visitation. New footprints appeared near the creek bed, along with signs that someone had carefully explored the area around her buildings without approaching the cabin itself. The pattern suggested reconnaissance rather than threat, as though her visitor was assessing the situation before making further contact. Rebecca repeated her food offering, this time adding a few strips of precious dried beef, along with the usual cornbread and beans. The gesture represented significant sacrifice given her own limited resources, but something about the careful courtesy shown by her visitor inspired generosity rather than mere duty. Again, the food disappeared completely, with the same neat arrangement of empty containers that spoke of gratitude and respect. This time, however, something had been left in return. A small, perfectly shaped arrowhead crafted from local flint with skill that spoke of considerable expertise lay arranged beside the folded cloth. The gift carried obvious symbolic meaning while demonstrating capabilities that commanded respect. The pattern continued for 3 more days, with Rebecca providing food and her mysterious visitor accepting with obvious gratitude while maintaining careful distance. Each exchange included some small token of appreciation, intricately woven. Grass figures, a beautifully carved wooden whistle, medicinal herbs that she recognized as valuable for treating various ailments. The gifts revealed both artistic ability and extensive knowledge of traditional crafts. By the 5th day, Rebecca had begun to feel genuine connection with her invisible beneficiary. The careful courtesy, obvious gratitude, and thoughtful reciprocation suggested someone raised with strong values despite current desperate circumstances. Her initial wariness had gradually given way to protective concern for whoever was surviving on her charity, while maintaining such dignified behavior. The drought showed no signs of breaking, while her own situation continued deteriorating along with everyone else's in the territory. Yet the knowledge that her actions had preserved someone's life provided satisfaction that partially offset other anxieties. Whatever complications might eventually arise from her choice to help, she felt certain that Michael would have approved of her compassion towards someone in need. Little did Rebecca know that her simple acts of kindness had set in motion events that would transform not only her own life, but the destiny of an entire Comanche band whose honor codes demanded responses that transcended anything she could have imagined possible. The 6th dawn brought something Rebecca had never expected to see on her remote homestead. As she stepped outside to begin her morning routine, movement in the distance caught her eye. A lone figure approached across the prairie, moving with the steady gait of someone who had traveled far but was not yet exhausted. Even from a distance, she could tell this was no ordinary traveler. The person walked directly toward her property with a purpose that suggested familiarity with the location. As the figure drew closer, Rebecca realized she was looking at a young Comanche boy, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, walking openly across the open ground without any attempt at concealment. His appearance was startling after days of mysterious nighttime visits and careful hiding. The boy was clearly Comanche based on his clothing style and appearance, his traditional garments, while showing signs of hard travel and privation, were well made and spoke of a family with resources and status. Most remarkably, he carried himself with dignity that seemed remarkable for someone who had obviously been surviving on her charitable offerings. When he reached the edge of her property, the boy stopped and waited. His posture was respectful, but not subservient, suggesting someone accustomed to courtesy, but not submission. He made no attempt to approach her buildings, instead standing in clear view, while obviously waiting for her to acknowledge his presence and indicate whether he was welcome. Rebecca approached slowly, uncertain about proper protocols for such encounters. Her experience with Native Americans was limited to brief, formal interactions during trading expeditions, and those had always been mediated by experienced traders who understood cultural nuances. Now she found herself facing a direct encounter that required her to navigate unfamiliar social territories without guidance. "Good morning," she said simply, stopping several yards away to maintain a comfortable distance for both of them. The boy's response surprised her with its clarity and sophistication. "Good morning, lady. I am Swift Hawk of the people. You have been very kind to me during my time of need. I come now to thank you properly and to explain my circumstances." His English was excellent, with only a slight accent that suggested formal education rather than casual acquisition of the language. The formality of his introduction and the care with which he chose his words indicated someone raised with strong emphasis on proper behavior and respect for social conventions. "I am Rebecca Caldwell," she replied, matching his formal tone while studying his face for clues about his intentions and condition. "You're welcome to sit in the shade while we talk. The day is already getting hot." Swift Hawk's relief at her invitation was visible, though he maintained his dignified bearing as he moved toward the porch. His movements revealed the careful economy of someone who had been conserving energy, while his obvious gratitude for the offer of shade spoke to the physical toll his recent ordeal had taken. As they settled on the porch, Rebecca had her first clear opportunity to assess the boy's condition. He was thin but not emaciated, suggesting that her food offerings had been sufficient to prevent serious malnutrition. His eyes were alert and intelligent, while his manner conveyed both natural confidence and genuine appreciation for her assistance. "I must ask your forgiveness for taking your food without permission," Swift Hawk began. "My circumstances were desperate, and I was afraid that approaching directly might frighten you or create problems you didn't deserve." "You don't need to apologize for being hungry," Rebecca replied gently. "I'm glad I could help, but I'm curious about how you came to be alone out here. This isn't exactly a well-traveled area." The story that emerged over the next hour revealed circumstances that were both more complex and more dangerous than Rebecca had imagined. Swift Hawk was the son of a respected Comanche leader named Running Bear, whose band had reluctantly accepted reservation life after years of resistance. Conditions there had become increasingly difficult as promised supplies failed to arrive and government officials proved either incompetent or corrupt. "My father and the other men decided to leave the reservation temporarily to hunt buffalo," Swift Hawk explained. "The meat was needed for our people, especially the children and elders who were suffering from poor rations. The hunting party was small, only 10 men, and they planned to return quickly to avoid trouble with the soldiers. The hunting expedition had been successful initially, locating a small herd of buffalo in the remote areas where the animals still roamed freely. However, their return journey had been interrupted by a cavalry patrol that had orders to arrest any Native Americans found outside reservation boundaries. The encounter had resulted in a running battle that scattered the hunting party and left Swift Hawk separated from his father in unfamiliar territory. "I was helping my uncle Eagle Eye with the pack horses when the soldiers appeared," Swift Hawk continued, his voice carrying the weight of traumatic memory. "He told me to run toward the rising sun, away from the fighting. I was supposed to find my way back to our people and tell them what had happened. But the boy's escape had not gone according to plan. He had become disoriented in unfamiliar territory, eventually finding himself miles from any landmarks he recognized. His supplies had been limited to what he carried in a small pouch, and those had been exhausted after several days of walking. I was following the creek beds, hoping to find water and maybe some game," he explained. "But everything was so dry, and I had no luck hunting with just my small knife. By the time I found your place, I hadn't eaten in almost 3 days and was starting to feel weak." The revelation of his identity and circumstances created new complications. Swift Hawk was not just any hungry child, but the son of a prominent Comanche leader whose family would certainly be searching for him. More troubling was the knowledge that he had been separated during a military engagement, which meant that federal authorities might also be looking for him as a potential witness to illegal activities. "Do you know what happened to your father? And the others?" Rebecca asked, dreading the answer while knowing she needed to understand the full situation. "I don't know," Swift Hawk admitted, his composure finally showing cracks as he confronted the uncertainty that had been haunting him. "The gunfire lasted for a long time, but I was running away as fast as I could. My uncle told me not to look back, to just keep going until I was safe." The anguish in his voice revealed the psychological toll of not knowing whether his family had survived the encounter. For a boy his age, the combination of physical hardship and emotional trauma would have been overwhelming. Yet he had managed to maintain his dignity and courtesy, even under the most difficult circumstances. Rebecca found herself facing a decision that would have profound implications regardless of what she chose. Keeping Swift Hawk hidden might be safest for him in the short term, but it would also make her complicit in harboring someone the military might consider a fugitive. Turning him over to authorities might protect her from legal consequences, but could result in his imprisonment or worse treatment at the hands of officials who viewed all Native Americans with suspicion. "What do you want to do?" she asked, deciding to let his own judgment guide her response. "Do you want to try to get back to your people, or would you prefer to stay here until we can figure out what happened to your family?" Swift Hawk's answer revealed the depth of thought he'd given to his situation during the long days of hiding and uncertainty. "I think my father will come looking for me if he survived the fight with the soldiers. He's a great tracker, and he has always found me whenever I was lost. But I don't know how long it might take him to find me here, or if he will be able to come at all." The boy's faith in his father's devotion was touching, but Rebecca wondered whether such optimism was realistic given the dangerous circumstances surrounding their separation. Military patrols were actively searching for members of the scattered hunting party, and any attempt to rescue Swift Hawk would require considerable risk and careful planning. "If your father does come looking for you, how would he find this place?" Rebecca asked, trying to understand the practical aspects of potential rescue attempts. "My father says I leave tracks that even a blind man could follow," Swift Hawk replied with a hint of a smile. "He taught me to read signs and follow trails, though I'm not nearly as skilled as he is. If he survived the fight, he will be able to follow my path, especially since I stayed near water sources and made mistakes that would leave clear traces for someone who knows what to look for." This revelation added another layer of complexity to Rebecca's situation. If Swift Hawk's father was indeed skilled enough to track him across the prairie, then her homestead might soon receive a visit from a Comanche warrior whose intentions could be either grateful or hostile, depending on his interpretation of the circumstances. "What kind of man is your father?" Rebecca asked, hoping to better understand what she might be facing. Swift Hawk's face brightened as he spoke about Running Bear, revealing the deep affection and respect he felt for his father. "He is a great warrior, but also very wise and fair. He has fought when necessary to protect our people, but he also understands that the old ways must change if we are to survive. My mother says he can see further into the future than most men can see into the past." The description was encouraging, suggesting that Running Bear might be someone capable of reasonable discussion if he did appear at her homestead. However, Rebecca remained aware that even reasonable men could become dangerous when their family members were threatened or when they felt their honor had been challenged. "He taught me that a man's word must be like stone, unchanging and solid," Swift Hawk continued, "and that true strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. When I was younger and afraid of thunder, he told me that courage isn't about feeling no fear, but about doing what is right even when fear fills your heart." This information helped Rebecca understand the strength of the bond that would motivate Running Bear to search for his son despite obvious dangers. The boy's confidence in his father's devotion was clearly based on years of experience. with someone who had demonstrated unwavering loyalty to family obligations. As the morning progressed and the heat began building toward its usual oppressive intensity, Rebecca made practical decisions about Swift Hawk's immediate welfare. Despite the potential complications, she couldn't bring herself to turn away a child who had already suffered so much. Her offer to provide shelter, food, and protection until his family situation could be resolved reflected both humanitarian instincts and growing personal attachment to the brave, courteous boy. "You are very kind, Mrs. Caldwell," Swift Hawk sighed, his formal manner softening slightly as he accepted her assistance. "But I don't want to bring trouble to your home. If soldiers come looking for me, they might think you are helping enemies of the government." His concern for her welfare, despite his own precarious situation, impressed Rebecca and reinforced her decision to help him regardless of potential consequences. "Let me worry about that," she said firmly. "Right now you need rest, food, and a safe place to recover your strength. We can figure out other problems as they arise." The arrangement they worked out balanced Swift Hawk's need for security with Rebecca's requirement to maintain normal routines that wouldn't attract unwanted attention. He would sleep in the barn's loft, which provided both concealment and quick escape routes if necessary. During daylight hours he would stay near the buildings but out of sight from the main road, helping with chores that could be performed without creating suspicious activity. Swift Hawk's assistance proved invaluable in ways Rebecca hadn't anticipated. His knowledge of drought survival techniques, learned through tribal experience with harsh conditions, helped her improve her water conservation methods and identify edible plants she had overlooked. His hunting skills, while limited by the scarcity of game, nonetheless provided occasional additions to their meager food supplies. More importantly, his presence ended the crushing isolation that had been weighing on Rebecca's spirit. Having someone to talk with, even about simple daily matters, restored a sense of human connection that she hadn't realized how desperately she missed. Swift Hawk's intelligence and curiosity made him an engaging companion, while his courteous manner and obvious gratitude created a household atmosphere that was surprisingly comfortable despite its unusual circumstances. The boy's stories about Comanche life provided Rebecca with insights into Native American culture that challenged many of the stereotypes she had absorbed from newspaper accounts and popular literature. His descriptions of tribal governance, family relationships, and spiritual beliefs revealed sophisticated social systems that bore little resemblance to the primitive savagery that white society generally assumed characterized all indigenous peoples. "My people have laws and customs that are just as complex as those of white society," Swift Hawk explained during one of their evening conversations. "We have different ways of organizing ourselves, but that doesn't mean we are less civilized or intelligent." These discussions opened Rebecca's mind to perspectives she had never seriously considered. While Swift Hawk's obvious education and refinement provided living proof that Native Americans were capable of achievements that mainstream society rarely acknowledged or respected. The third day of Swift Hawk's open presence at the homestead brought the first sign that their situation might soon change dramatically. Samson, Rebecca's horse, became restless during the afternoon, ears pricked and head raised as though detecting something beyond human perception. His behavior continued into the evening, suggesting that something or someone was moving in the distance. Swift Hawk noticed the gelding's alertness immediately and interpreted it with knowledge gained through years of frontier life. "Someone approaches," he said quietly. "Samson senses horses or people moving toward us, probably still far away, but getting closer." Rebecca felt her heart rate increase as she considered the implications. The approach could be innocent travelers, military patrols, neighbors, or Swift Hawk's family members conducting rescue operations. Each possibility carried different risks and required different responses. "Could it be your father?" she asked, hoping for the best while preparing mentally for various alternatives. "Maybe," Swift Hawk replied, his voice carrying both hope and apprehension. "My father would approach carefully, especially if he wasn't sure of my safety or your intentions. He would want to observe the situation before making contact." That night, both Rebecca and Swift Hawk slept fitfully, alert for sounds that might indicate visitors approaching under cover of darkness. The knowledge that their peaceful interlude was probably ending created tension that affected every aspect of their evening routine. Dawn brought clear evidence that change was indeed coming. Fresh horse tracks appeared near the creek bed, indicating that riders had approached during the night to within a few hundred yards of the homestead. The tracks showed multiple horses, suggesting a group rather than a single traveler, and their pattern indicated careful reconnaissance rather than casual passage. Swift Hawk studied the tracks with excitement and apprehension. "These are unshod horses," he observed, "and the way they moved shows riders who know how to approach without being detected. This could be my people." The possibility that rescue was at hand filled Swift Hawk with joy, but Rebecca found herself experiencing mixed emotions. While she wanted the boy reunited with his family, she had grown fond of his company and dreaded returning to the isolation that had characterized her life before his arrival. More practically, she worried about how Swift Hawk's family would interpret her role in recent events. Would they see her as a good Samaritan who had saved their child, or as a white woman whose motives for helping might be suspect? The answer to that question would determine whether the approaching encounter would bring gratitude or hostility. The morning passed with increasing tension as both Rebecca and Swift Hawk waited for whatever contact might come. The heat built toward its usual oppressive intensity, but neither could concentrate on normal activities while knowing that their situation was about to be resolved one way or another. It was mid-afternoon when the first figure became visible. In the distance, appearing as a heat shimmer that gradually resolved into a mounted warrior approaching at a steady but unhurried pace. Swift Hawk's excitement was immediate and obvious as he recognized the distinctive riding style and equipment of his people. "That is my father," he said with absolute certainty, his voice carrying relief and joy that had been building for days. "Running Bear has found me, just as I knew he would." Rebecca's first glimpse of Running Bear, even from a distance, conveyed an impression of capability and authority that commanded respect. He rode with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the saddle, while his approach demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested military experience. Most notably, he came alone despite the tracks indicating a larger group, showing either confidence in his ability to handle whatever situation he might find or respect for the peaceful nature of his mission. As Running Bear drew closer, Rebecca could see that he was indeed an impressive figure, tall and powerfully built, probably in his early 40s. He possessed the bearing of natural leadership while his equipment and clothing indicated someone of status within his community. His face, when it became visible, was marked by intelligence and determination, but also by lines of worry that spoke to the stress of recent events. The moment of contact, when it came, would determine the future course of events for everyone involved. Swift Hawk's reunion with his father would end one phase of the crisis, but it would also begin another as Rebecca faced the unknown reactions of a Comanche warrior whose son she had sheltered during desperate circumstances. Neither Rebecca nor Swift Hawk could have imagined the extraordinary developments that Running Bear's arrival would bring, or the way that their simple act of compassion would lead to consequences that would transform all their lives in ways that defied every expectation about how such encounters typically resolve themselves on the frontier. Running Bear dismounted 50 yards from Rebecca's cabin with fluid grace that spoke of decades spent in the saddle. His horse, a magnificent paint stallion with distinctive black and white markings, stood perfectly still without being tied, demonstrating the kind of training that reflected both skill and patience. The warrior himself presented a figure that commanded immediate respect through bearing alone. Without any need for aggressive display or intimidating gestures, he wore traditional Comanche clothing that had been crafted with obvious care and expense. His shirt, made from the finest buckskin, bore intricate beadwork in patterns that, Swift Hawk had explained, carried specific meaning about clan affiliation and personal achievements. A ceremonial knife hung at his side, its handle wrapped in leather and decorated with eagle feathers that indicated honors earned in battle or leadership roles. Most striking was Running Bear's face, which combined intelligence with the kind of weathered strength that came from years of facing challenges that tested both physical and mental capabilities. His eyes, dark and penetrating, missed nothing. As they surveyed the homestead's layout, noting defensible positions, escape routes, and any potential threats. Yet despite this tactical awareness, his expression remained calm and non-threatening. Swift Hawk ran toward his father with the uninhibited joy of a child reunited with beloved family. The warrior's stern features softened immediately as he embraced his son, speaking rapidly in Comanche while examining the boy for signs of injury or maltreatment. Their conversation, conducted in their native language, was clearly emotional as Swift Hawk recounted his experiences in Running Bear, expressed relief at finding him safe. Rebecca remained on her porch, uncertain whether to approach or wait to be acknowledged. Her knowledge of Plains Indian customs was limited, and she had no desire to inadvertently commit some breach of protocol that might be interpreted as disrespectful or hostile. The reunion between father and son was clearly a private moment that deserved respectful distance. After several minutes of intense conversation, Running Bear turned his attention toward Rebecca. His approach was formal and deliberate, each step calculated to convey respect rather than threat. When he reached speaking distance, he removed his hat in a gesture that bridged cultural differences through universally understood courtesy. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his English clear and only slightly accented, "I am Running Bear of the Enmangbent, the Comanche people. I have come to bring my son home to our people." His voice carried natural authority that demanded attention, but also genuine warmth that suggested positive intentions. The formal introduction and courteous manner aligned with Swift Hawk's descriptions of his father as someone who understood both worlds and could navigate successfully between them. "I'm Rebecca Caldwell," she replied, matching his formal tone while studying his face for clues about his assessment of the situation. "Swift Hawk has been welcome here. He's a fine young man who has been very helpful during his stay." Running Bear's expression revealed surprise at this information. Whatever he had expected to find at the homestead, it apparently hadn't included reports of his son providing assistance rather than merely receiving charity. His eyes moved between Rebecca and Swift Hawk, clearly seeking to understand the nature of their relationship and the circumstances that had brought them together. "My son tells me you fed him when he was starving," Running Bear said, his tone carrying significance that went beyond simple gratitude. "He says you asked for nothing in return and that you treated him with kindness and respect despite his desperate condition." The warrior's careful choice of words suggested that he understood the cultural implications of Rebecca's actions better than she did herself. Among Plains tribes, hospitality to strangers was considered a sacred obligation, but extending such generosity across racial lines during times of conflict required courage that deserved special recognition. "Anyone would have done the same," Rebecca replied, though she knew this wasn't necessarily true. Many settlers would have turned away a Native American child regardless of his condition, either from fear or prejudice. "No," Running Bear said, firmly, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Many would not. Many would have seen only his race and not his need. You saw a hungry child and fed him. This is the action of someone with honor." The formal way he pronounced the word honor carried weight that suggested specific meaning within Comanche culture. Rebecca sensed that she was being evaluated according to standards she didn't fully understand, and that Running Bear's assessment would have consequences beyond the immediate reunion. Swift Hawk, meanwhile, had been speaking quietly with his father in Comanche, clearly providing additional details about his experiences at the homestead. Running Bear listened intently, occasionally, asking questions that prompted longer explanations from the boy. Their conversation continued for several minutes while Rebecca waited uncertainly nearby. When they finished talking, Running Bear's demeanor had shifted noticeably. The cautious formality of initial contact had been replaced by something warmer and more personal, as though Swift Hawk's account had resolved questions about Rebecca's character and motivations that the warrior needed answered before proceeding further. "My son speaks of your kindness in ways that touch my heart," Running Bear said, his English becoming more natural and less formally structured. "He tells me you not only fed his body, but also his spirit, treating him as a guest rather than a burden during days when you could spare little for yourself." The observation revealed that Swift Hawk had provided detailed accounts of their interactions, including Rebecca's own difficult circumstances. The boy had clearly been observant about her struggles with the drought and economic hardship, information that would help his father understand the full significance of her generosity. "Swift Hawk has been good company," Rebecca replied honestly. "I've enjoyed having him here. This is a lonely place, especially during hard times like these." Running Bear nodded thoughtfully, as though her admission confirmed something he had suspected. "Loneliness can be as dangerous as hunger," he observed. "My son's presence has been a gift to you, as well as your care being a gift to him." This recognition of mutual benefit impressed Rebecca, as it suggested understanding that transcended simple concepts of charity and obligation. Running Bear seemed to grasp that relationships could provide value to all participants, rather than creating one-sided debts that required repayment. "I must ask about my brothers and the others who were with us," Running Bear continued, his expression becoming more serious. "Swift Hawk was separated during trouble with soldiers. Have you heard anything about what happened to the rest of our hunting party?" Rebecca's heart sank as she realized she had no information to offer about Swift Hawk's uncles and the other warriors. "I'm sorry, but I haven't heard anything. We're quite isolated here, and news doesn't travel quickly to this area." Running Bear's disappointment was visible, though he maintained his composure. "I had hoped you might have learned something from travelers or neighbors. The uncertainty has been difficult for all our families. What do you know about what happened?" Rebecca asked, hoping to better understand the situation that had led to Swift Hawk's separation from his family. The story that emerged was more complex and troubling than Swift Hawk's earlier account had revealed. The hunting party had indeed been successful in locating buffalo, but their return journey had been complicated by increasing military patrols that were under orders to arrest any Native Americans found outside reservation boundaries. Her choice would not only affect her own future, but would also establish precedent for intercultural relations that could influence other interactions between Native Americans and settlers throughout the territory. As the sun climbed toward its midday position, bringing with it the familiar oppressive heat of the continuing drought, Rebecca began to understand that her quiet life as an isolated homesteader was about to end forever. Whether she accepted or declined the Comanche offer, the events of the past few days had transformed her from an anonymous settler into a key figure in the complex dynamics of frontier society. The 100 painted horses that grazed peacefully in her corral represented far more than simple wealth or even cultural friendship. They embodied the possibility that cooperation between different peoples could transcend the conflicts that seemed to define so much of frontier life. The decision she faced would determine whether that possibility became reality or remained merely an inspiring dream that failed to achieve lasting significance. The first night with 100 painted horses grazing outside her cabin was unlike anything Rebecca had ever experienced. The animals moved like shadows in the moonlight, their occasional snorts and whinnies creating a symphony that spoke of power barely contained. Spirit Dancer, the magnificent paint stallion, had positioned himself near the cabin, as though assuming guardianship duties that extended beyond simple grazing. Swift Hawk had constructed a temporary shelter for himself in the barn loft, but spent most of the evening moving among the horses, checking their condition, and speaking to them in a musical Comanche language that seemed to calm even the most spirited animals. His knowledge of each horse's personality and history revealed the deep bonds that existed between the Comanche people and their equine partners. That mare there, the one with the lightning pattern on her flank, her name is Thunder Woman, Swift Hawk explained as they watched the horses settle for the night. She has carried warriors through 2 battles against enemy tribes, never faltering even when arrows flew past her ears. She knows the sound of gunfire and the smell of blood, but she has never shown fear. Each horse carried similar stories of courage, loyalty, and partnership that had shaped Comanche success for generations. These were not merely valuable animals, but living repositories of tribal history and culture whose presence at Rebecca's homestead represented trust that transcended simple monetary value. The practical challenges of caring for 100 horses quickly became apparent. Water consumption alone required Rebecca to pump the well continuously throughout the day, while feed requirements exceeded anything her modest operation could sustain long-term. The animals were accustomed to prairie grass supplemented by occasional grain, but the drought had eliminated most natural forage in the immediate area. "We'll need to move them to better grazing soon," Swift Hawk observed, surveying the barren landscape around the homestead. "There's good grass about 15 miles north near Buffalo Creek, but keeping them there would require constant watching to prevent theft or stampeding." The logistical complexities of horse ownership on such a scale had never occurred to Rebecca. During her initial consideration of the Comanche offer, managing 100 horses would require knowledge, resources, and assistance that she currently lacked, while the economic benefits would depend on successfully marketing animals whose value she was only beginning to understand. More troubling were the social implications that became apparent as neighbors began arriving to investigate reports of unusual activity at the Caldwell homestead. Word of the Comanche delegation's visit had spread quickly through the sparse settler community, creating curiosity mixed with suspicion about Rebecca's involvement in tribal affairs. The first visitor was Thomas Hargrove, a neighboring cattle rancher whose property lay 20 miles east of Rebecca's claim. His arrival on the second morning, accompanied by 3 armed men, suggested concerns that went beyond casual neighborly interest. Hargrove's reputation for hostility toward Native Americans was well known throughout the district, and his presence boded ill for peaceful resolution of potential conflicts. "Morning, Rebecca," Hargrove said, his tone carrying false friendliness that barely concealed underlying hostility. "Heard you had some interesting visitors yesterday. Folks are wondering what kind of business you might be conducting with hostile Indians." The accusation stung because it misrepresented both Rebecca's actions and the nature of her relationship with Swift Hawk's family. Her assistance to a starving child had been characterized as collaboration with enemy forces, demonstrating the prejudice that made intercultural cooperation dangerous for everyone involved. "I helped a lost boy who was starving," Rebecca replied firmly, refusing to accept Hargrove's characterization of recent events. "His family came to thank me for my kindness. There's nothing hostile or suspicious about showing gratitude for humanitarian assistance." Hargrove's examination of the magnificent horses revealed both his expertise in evaluating quality livestock and his suspicion about how Rebecca had acquired such valuable animals. His experience as a rancher made it impossible for him to dismiss the horses as ordinary stock, while his prejudices made it difficult for him to accept that Native Americans would voluntarily part with such wealth. "These are war ponies, Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying implications that made his companions shift nervously in their saddles. "Animals trained for fighting, not farming. Why would Indians give you cavalry mounts unless they expected you to use them against other whites?" The suggestion that she might be planning military action against her own people was so absurd that Rebecca almost laughed. But Hargrove's serious expression and his companion's alert postures made clear that they considered the possibility genuine. The gulf between reality and prejudiced assumptions created communication barriers that rational discussion couldn't easily bridge. "These horses were given as gifts to honor my kindness toward a child," Rebecca explained patiently. "They're valuable because the Comanche people wanted to demonstrate their appreciation for someone who showed compassion when compassion was needed." Hargrove's skepticism was evident in his expression and tone. "Indians don't give away their best horses to white women out of the goodness of their hearts. There's got to be some other arrangement, some understanding about what they expect in return." The conversation revealed assumptions about Native American motivations that made genuine understanding impossible. Hargrove's worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that tribal peoples might act from generosity or honor, requiring him to search for hidden motives that confirmed his existing prejudices. Swift Hawk, who had been listening from the barn doorway, approached with the dignified bearing that had impressed Rebecca from their first meeting. His presence immediately increased tension as Hargrove and his companions regarded him with the suspicion typically reserved for potential threats. "Sir," Swift Hawk said, addressing Hargrove with careful courtesy, "I am the boy Mrs. Caldwell helped when I was starving. These horses were given by my people to honor her kindness. There's no conspiracy or hidden purpose, only gratitude for someone who showed mercy to a child in need." Hargrove's response revealed the depth of his prejudice and his unwillingness to consider Native American perspectives as valid. "Boy, I don't know what lies your people have told you to say, but decent white folks know better than to trust Indian promises or Indian gifts." The insult to both Swift Hawk's intelligence and his family's honor created a moment of dangerous tension. Rebecca could see the boy struggling to maintain the respectful demeanor his upbringing demanded, while facing deliberate provocation designed to create the kind of incident that Hargrove could use to justify violence. "Mr. Hargrove," Rebecca intervened firmly, "Swift Hawk is my guest, and I'll thank you for treating him with the courtesy I would expect any visitor to receive. If you have concerns about my actions, you can discuss them with me directly rather than insulting a child." Her defense of Swift Hawk surprised Hargrove, who apparently expected white solidarity against Native American interests regardless of circumstances. Rebecca's willingness to take sides against other whites in favor of an Indian boy challenged assumptions about racial loyalty that formed the foundation of his worldview. "Rebecca, you're making a mistake that could get people killed," Hargrove sighed, his tone becoming more threatening. "When word gets around about your Indian sympathies, folks are going to start wondering whose side you're really on. That's not a question you want people asking in times like these." The implicit threat was clear, though carefully phrased to avoid direct menace that might justify retaliation. Hargrove was warning Rebecca that her association with Native Americans could result in social ostracism or worse consequences from whites who viewed such relationships as treacherous. As Hargrove and his companions departed, their parting glances at the horses and pointed comments about reporting suspicious activities to territorial authorities made clear that Rebecca's troubles were just beginning. The magnificent gift that Chief Thundercloud had intended as recognition of her nobility was becoming the source of suspicion and hostility from her own community. "Mrs. Caldwell," Swift Hawk said quietly after the men had ridden away, "perhaps I should take the horses and return to my people. I don't want my presence to create danger for you." The boy's concern for her welfare despite the risks he would face traveling alone with such valuable animals touched Rebecca deeply. His willingness to sacrifice the reunion with his family in order to protect her from consequences of her own generosity revealed a character that put adult behavior to shame. "You're not going anywhere," Rebecca said firmly. "I won't let prejudice and ignorance drive away someone who has done nothing wrong. Besides, those horses need proper care, and you're the only one who knows how to provide it." Her decision to stand by Swift Hawk and the horses represented a conscious choice to accept whatever consequences might follow rather than abandon principles that defined her character. The isolation she had experienced as a widow would be nothing compared to the ostracism that awaited someone branded as an Indian sympathizer in territorial society. The next few days brought additional visitors whose reactions ranged from curiosity to hostility, but none who could appreciate the cultural significance of what had occurred. Reverend Williams from Palo Duro Springs arrived with concerns about Rebecca's spiritual welfare, warning that association with heathen influences could endanger her soul along with her reputation. "Rebecca, my dear," the elderly minister said, with genuine concern, "I understand your charitable impulses, but we must be careful not to let misguided compassion lead us into fellowship with those who reject Christian civilization. The Lord calls us to help the less fortunate, but not at the expense of our own salvation." His theological objections to her actions created additional complications that Rebecca hadn't anticipated. Religious opposition to intercultural cooperation added moral dimensions to what she had considered purely humanitarian assistance, forcing her to choose between community approval and personal conscience. "Reverend, I fed a hungry child," Rebecca replied with patience that required considerable effort. "I can't believe that showing mercy to someone in need could be against God's will, regardless of that person's race or religion," the minister's response revealed theological perspectives that used religious doctrine to justify racial prejudice. "The scriptures teach us to help our own people first, Rebecca. Charity that weakens Christian communities in order to assist those who might use such help against us serves Satan's purposes rather than God's plan." These conversations exhausted Rebecca both emotionally and intellectually, as they required her to defend actions that seemed obviously moral against arguments that twisted religious and social principles to support conclusions she found repugnant. The mental energy required to maintain her position while remaining civil to critics began taking a toll that affected her physical health. Swift Hawk observed these interactions with the keen intelligence that had impressed Rebecca from their first meeting. His understanding of white society's complexity grew as he witnessed the various ways that fear and prejudice could manifest themselves in people who considered themselves moral and civilized. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said one evening as they watched the horses graze in the fading light, "my father warned me that some white people would react badly to our gift. He said that kindness between different peoples sometimes frightens those who profit from hatred and conflict." The boy's mature understanding of social dynamics impressed Rebecca while highlighting the sophistication of Comanche analysis of white society. Swift Hawk's education had prepared him to navigate cultural complexity that many adults never mastered, revealing educational traditions that produced remarkable results. "What else did your father tell you about how people might react?" Rebecca asked, curious about Comanche predictions regarding the consequences of their generous gesture. Swift Hawk's answer revealed strategic thinking that extended beyond immediate circumstances to longer-term implications of intercultural cooperation. He said that some whites would try to use our gift against you, claiming that accepting it made you disloyal to your own people. But he also said that others would see the truth and respect you for showing courage in the face of criticism. The accuracy of Running Bear's predictions became evident as more neighbors arrived to investigate the situation at Rebecca's homestead. Some, like Hargrove, arrived with hostility and suspicion that made productive conversation impossible. Others came with genuine curiosity about events that challenged their assumptions about Indian-white relations. Among the latter was Dr. Samuel Wilson, a physician who served the scattered homesteads throughout the region. His arrival on the fourth day brought both medical expertise and intellectual perspective that provided welcome relief from previous confrontational encounters. "Rebecca," Dr. Wilson said after examining the horses with obvious appreciation for their quality, "I've heard various versions of what happened here. Would you mind telling me the actual story so I can separate fact from fiction? His request for accurate information rather than confirmation of predetermined assumptions marked him as someone capable of objective evaluation. Rebecca's account of her assistance to Swift Hawk and the subsequent gift ceremony received careful attention that suggested genuine interest and understanding rather than judging. "Remarkable," Dr. Wilson said when she finished. "I've treated enough frontier injuries to know good horses when I see them, and these animals represent extraordinary value. The cultural significance of such a gift must be equally extraordinary." His recognition of both material and symbolic dimensions of the Comanche gesture demonstrated sophisticated understanding that had been absent from previous visitors. Dr. Wilson's medical background had apparently provided exposure to different cultures that enabled appreciation for complex motivations and customs. "What concerns me," he continued, "is the reaction you're likely to face from people who can't distinguish between legitimate friendship and dangerous collaboration. The political climate regarding Indian relations has become increasingly paranoid, making reasonable cooperation difficult even when it would benefit everyone involved." His warning echoed Running Bear's predictions while adding medical perspective on the psychological factors that drove extreme reactions to intercultural cooperation. Dr. Wilson had observed how fear and prejudice could overcome rational analysis, creating social dynamics that punished exactly the kind of behavior that might reduce conflict. "My advice," he said carefully, "is to document everything about how you acquired these horses. Write down the circumstances, get witnesses if possible, and keep records that prove the legitimate nature of your relationship with Swift Hawk's family. You may need such evidence if questions arise about your loyalty or activities." The practical nature of his suggestions impressed Rebecca, as they demonstrated understanding of legal and political realities that could affect her future safety. Dr. Wilson's medical practice had apparently taught him to anticipate problems and prepare defenses against accusations that might arise from misunderstood situations. That evening, as Rebecca sat on her porch watching the magnificent horses that had transformed her modest homestead into something resembling a prosperous ranch, she finally reached the decision that had been building since Chief Thunder Cloud's dramatic visit. The horses represented more than wealth or even cultural friendship. They embodied the possibility that cooperation between different peoples could transcend the hatred and conflict that seemed to define so much of frontier life. Accepting the horses would position her as a symbol of successful intercultural cooperation, while declining them might be interpreted as rejection of the very friendship they were meant to represent. More importantly, keeping the horses would demonstrate that kindness could be rewarded rather than punished, providing hope for others who might consider similar acts of compassion. "Swift Hawk," she called to the boy who was checking the horses. "Water supply for the final time that day. Tomorrow morning we're going to start building proper corrals for our horses. It's time I accepted your father's gift officially and learned how to be a proper horse rancher." Swift Hawk's joy at her decision was immediate and obvious, his face lit with the kind of happiness that came from seeing justice triumph over prejudice. While his excited response revealed how much her acceptance meant to him personally. "Mrs. Caldwell, you have made the best decision possible," he said, his young voice carrying adult conviction. "These horses will bring you prosperity and protection, while your acceptance will show others that friendship between our peoples is both possible and profitable." As the stars emerged in the clear Texas sky, Rebecca realized that her quiet life as an isolated homesteader was indeed ending forever. But instead of loss, she felt anticipation for the adventures that lay ahead as the owner of 100 magnificent painted horses and the friend of a proud Native American nation, whose respect she had earned through simple acts of human decency. The drought that had brought such hardship to her region would soon break. But the relationships forged during those difficult days would endure long after the rains returned and the prairie bloomed once again with the promise of better times ahead. The construction of proper horse facilities began at dawn on Rebecca's 5th day as owner of 100 painted horses. Swift Hawk had spent the previous evening sketching designs in the dirt, combining traditional Comanche knowledge of horse management with practical adaptations for permanent settlement. His plans called for multiple corrals that would allow separation of stallions from mares, isolation areas for sick or injured animals, and covered shelters that could protect valuable stock during severe weather. The Comanche way is to move with the horses, following grass and water as the seasons change, Swift Hawk explained as they marked locations for fence posts. But since you must stay in one place, we need to bring the grass and water to them, or create ways to move them safely to where those things exist. His understanding of both traditional and settled approaches to horse management impressed Rebecca, revealing educational depth that prepared young Comanche men for success in either nomadic or agricultural lifestyles. The boy's ability to adapt ancestral knowledge to new circumstances demonstrated the flexibility that would be essential for survival in a rapidly changing world. The work itself proved more challenging than Rebecca had anticipated. Digging post holes in drought-hardened ground required strength and endurance that pushed her physical limits, while splitting rails and constructing gates demanded carpentry skills she had never developed. Without Swift Hawk's assistance, the project would have been impossible for a woman working alone. Mrs. Caldwell, Swift Hawk observed as she struggled with a particularly stubborn fence post. Among my people, construction work like this is shared by the entire community. No one is expected to build alone what requires many hands to complete properly. His gentle suggestion carried implications about community cooperation that highlighted the isolation characteristic of white settlement. Patterns. Individual homesteading, while promoting self-reliance, also created situations where necessary work exceeded individual capabilities. Their labors were interrupted on the second day by the arrival of an unexpected visitor whose presence created immediate tension. Lieutenant James Parker of the 5th Cavalry rode up to the homestead with the formal bearing of someone conducting official business rather than making a social call. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust and heat, while his equipment reflected the high standards expected of regular Army officers. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Parker said, dismounting with military precision, "I'm investigating reports of unusual activities in this area. Specifically, I've been told that you're harboring stolen government property and maintaining unauthorized contact with hostile Indians." The accusations struck Rebecca like physical blows, revealing how quickly gossip and prejudice could transform humanitarian assistance into criminal activity. Hargrove's threats about reporting suspicious activities to territorial authorities had apparently resulted in an official investigation that could destroy her reputation and freedom. "Lieutenant, I'm caring for a Comanche boy whose family gave Emmy horses as thanks for helping him when he was starving," Rebecca replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite growing fear. "There's nothing stolen or hostile about showing gratitude for kindness." Lieutenant Parker's examination of the horses revealed professional expertise that enabled accurate assessment of their quality and value. His expression grew increasingly serious as he recognized the exceptional nature of the animals grazing in Rebecca's makeshift corral. "Ma'am, these are military-quality mounts worth more than most settlers see in a lifetime," he said. "I find it difficult to believe that Indians would voluntarily surrender such valuable assets to a white woman without expecting something significant in return." His skepticism echoed Hargrove's suspicions while carrying the additional weight of official authority. Lieutenant Parker's position as cavalry officer made his doubts about Rebecca's story potentially dangerous, as military conclusions about her activities could result in arrest and prosecution for crimes she hadn't committed. Swift Hawk stepped forward with the dignified bearing that had impressed every adult who met him. His presence immediately caught Lieutenant Parker's attention. as the boy's obvious health and respectful demeanor contradicted expectations about how hostile Indians might behave. "Sir," Swifthawk said, addressing the officer with careful courtesy, "I am Swifthawk, son of Running Bear of the Comanche Nation. This woman saved my life when I was lost and starving. My people gave these horses to honor her courage and kindness." Lieutenant Parker's response revealed professional training that enabled recognition of truth when presented clearly and directly. His years of frontier service had taught him to distinguish between genuine Native American dignity and the theatrical posturing that characterized criminals attempting deception. "Son, that's quite a story," the lieutenant said, his tone softening slightly, "but I'm going to need more evidence than your word to satisfy my superiors about the legitimacy of this situation." The requirement for official documentation created complications that Rebecca hadn't anticipated. Her decision to help a starving child had been spontaneous and humanitarian, leaving no paper trail that could satisfy bureaucratic demands for proof of legitimate activities. "What kind of evidence would satisfy your investigation?" Rebecca asked, hoping to find ways to demonstrate the truth of events that defied easy documentation. Lieutenant Parker's answer revealed the complex legal environment surrounding Indian-white relations in territorial Texas. "I'll need statements from witnesses who can verify your account, documentation of any official tribal authorization for gift-giving, and assurance that you're not planning to use these animals for activities that might threaten territorial security." The bureaucratic requirements seemed designed to make legitimate intercultural cooperation impossible rather than simply regulating dangerous activities. Rebecca began to understand why so few positive relationships developed between racial communities. When legal frameworks assumed hostile intent behind every interaction. "Lieutenant," she said carefully, "I helped a hungry child because it was the right thing to do. His family thanked me in the way their culture considers appropriate. I'm not planning any activities beyond learning to manage horses and perhaps establishing a breeding operation that could benefit the entire region." Her explanation of future plans seemed to interest Lieutenant Parker more than her account of past events. A breeding operation using Comanche horses could indeed benefit regional development, he admitted. "Quality stock is always in demand, and these animals could improve bloodlines throughout the territory." The economic implications of Rebecca's horse acquisition provided common ground that transcended racial suspicions. Lieutenant Parker's military experience had taught him to appreciate the practical value of superior horses, while his understanding of territorial development needs enabled recognition of potential benefits. "However," he continued, "I'll still need official documentation to close this investigation satisfactorily. Can you arrange for tribal representatives to provide written statements about the circumstances surrounding this gift?" The request for formal tribal documentation created new challenges that required diplomatic skills Rebecca didn't possess. Asking Chief Thundercloud to provide written justification for his generous gesture might be interpreted as questioning his authority or doubting his sincerity. Swifthawk's response demonstrated understanding of both military requirements and tribal protocols that could help resolve the documentation dilemma. "Lieutenant, my father speaks excellent English and has dealt with military authorities before. He could provide the kind of statement you need if approached with proper respect for tribal sovereignty." The boy's sophisticated understanding of diplomatic protocols impressed Lieutenant Parker while providing a practical solution to bureaucratic requirements. His suggestion demonstrated the kind of intercultural knowledge that could facilitate cooperation if given opportunity to develop. "That might work," Lieutenant Parker agreed. "If this Running Bear can provide credible documentation of tribal authorization for the horse gift, and if Mrs. Caldwell can demonstrate legitimate plans for using the animals, I can probably satisfy my superiors that no security threat exists." The possibility of official approval for her activities encouraged Rebecca while highlighting the complex legal environment that governed frontier relationships. Success would require not only maintaining good relations with Comanche leadership, but also satisfying territorial authorities whose suspicions could easily be renewed by political changes or social pressures. Lieutenant Parker's departure left Rebecca and Swift Hawk with new challenges that went beyond simple horse management. The need for official documentation of their relationship forced recognition that private acts of kindness had public consequences. That required careful management to avoid dangerous misunderstandings. Natural springs discovered on her property during well digging. Operations provided reliable water sources that supported hundreds of animals year-round. The offer of informal marketing assistance represented valuable connection to networks that could support future business development. Barnes's willingness to promote Rebecca's horses among professional colleagues suggested confidence in their quality that validated the Comanche assessment of their value. As the cattle drive continued northward, taking with it Barnes's promise to contact potential customers, Rebecca realized that her isolation was ending in ways she hadn't anticipated. The horses were attracting attention that would inevitably draw her into broader economic and social relationships throughout the region. Swift Hawk's observation of the encounter revealed sophisticated understanding of how different cultural networks could be connected through shared interests. The horse world is one place where Indians and whites sometimes find common ground, he explained. Both respect quality animals and the knowledge required to produce them. His insight highlighted potential for using horse breeding as a bridge between communities that typically viewed each other with suspicion. The common language of horsemanship could create communication channels where political and social differences might otherwise prevent productive interaction. The following days brought steady progress in constructing appropriate facilities for the growing horse operation. Swift Hawk's design proved remarkably efficient, utilizing natural landscape features to reduce construction requirements while maximizing security and comfort for the animals. Several natural springs discovered during excavation provided reliable water sources that could support hundreds of horses during even the worst drought conditions. Rebecca's physical conditioning improved rapidly through the demanding labor, transforming her from the exhausted widow of previous months into a stronger, more confident woman whose bearing reflected growing mastery of new challenges. Her increased strength paralleled developing knowledge about horse behavior and management that Swift Hawk patiently shared during their work. Mrs. Caldwell, the boy observed as they completed a particularly difficult section of fencing, "You learn faster than most adults I've known. My father says that true wisdom comes from willingness to recognize what you don't know and courage to learn from anyone who can teach you." The compliment, delivered with typical Comanche directness, acknowledged both her humility in accepting instruction from a child and her determination to master skills required for her new responsibilities. Swift Hawk's assessment of her character validated the decision to form partnership across cultural boundaries that others might have avoided. Their work was interrupted by another official visitor whose arrival created different tensions than Lieutenant Parker's investigation had generated. Judge William Hollister, representative of Territorial Civil Authority, approached the homestead with the deliberate manner of someone conducting assessment for legal purposes rather than seeking confrontation. "Mrs. Caldwell," Judge Hollister said, introducing himself with formal courtesy, "I've received reports about your recent acquisition of horses from Comanche sources. I'm here to ensure that all legal requirements regarding property transfers and ownership documentation have been properly addressed." The judge's approach differed significantly from military concerns about security threats, focusing instead on civil regulations that governed property ownership throughout the territory. His interest in documentation, rather than security implications, suggested different priorities that might create new challenges or opportunities. Rebecca's presentation of the papers running bare had created an immediate change in Judge Hollister's demeanor. His examination of the formal documents revealed professional appreciation for their comprehensive nature and careful attention to legal requirements. "These are remarkably thorough," he said, reviewing the detailed descriptions of each horse and formal statements from tribal authorities. Most territorial residents struggle to produce documentation half this comprehensive for routine transactions. Whoever prepared these understood our legal system quite well. The judge's recognition of Running Bear's diplomatic expertise provided validation that tribal leadership had indeed anticipated legal challenges and prepared appropriate responses. The quality of documentation suggested sophistication that contradicted common assumptions about Native American understanding of white legal systems. "With papers like these," Judge Hollister continued, "you should have no difficulty establishing clear title to these animals in any court within the territory." The Tribal Council's formal declaration of gift status addresses taxation concerns, while the individual horse descriptions would satisfy any identification requirements for sale or transport. His professional assessment of the documentation's adequacy provided legal security that Rebecca hadn't realized she needed. Judge Hollister's approval meant that her ownership rights would be recognized and protected by territorial authorities, regardless of how she had acquired the horses. More surprisingly, the judge's conversation revealed personal interest in developing horse breeding operations throughout the region. His discussion of potential economic benefits for local communities suggested appreciation for Rebecca's enterprise that went beyond simple legal compliance. Quality horse breeding could transform the regional economy, Judge Hollister explained as their conversation extended beyond official business. The cavalry alone requires thousands of replacements annually, while expanding ranching operations creates steady demand for working stock. A successful breeding program with animals of this quality would generate prosperity that benefits everyone. His perspective on regional development helped Rebecca understand broader implications of her new enterprise. The horses represented not only personal opportunity, but potential catalyst for economic growth that could create prosperity beyond her individual circumstances. As Judge Hollister prepared to depart, his final comments revealed insight into social dynamics that would affect Rebecca's future success. "You'll face opposition from those who profit from maintaining racial divisions," he warned. "Some powerful interests depend on preventing exactly the kind of cooperation your partnership with these Comanche people represents." The judge's candid assessment of political realities demonstrated understanding of social forces that shaped frontier development. His warning about opposition from those threatened by intercultural cooperation prepared Rebecca for challenges that went beyond practical horse management to broader social conflicts. "However," he added, "there are also influential people who recognize that the future of this territory depends on developing relationships that enable all communities to contribute to prosperity and stability. Your success could help demonstrate possibilities that policymakers need to understand." This recognition of potential broader impact added weight to Rebecca's responsibilities while offering support from unexpected quarters. Judge Hollister's implicit encouragement suggested allies within territorial governance who might protect innovative approaches to intercultural cooperation when opposition inevitably arose. Following the judge's departure, Swift Hawk's reaction revealed developing understanding of white political systems that complemented Rebecca's growing knowledge of Comanche traditions. His observations about different types of authority within territorial governance demonstrated sophisticated analysis of power structures that affected intercultural relationships. "The judge speaks with different authority than the lieutenant," Swift Hawk noted. "Military power can destroy things quickly but cannot build lasting peace. Judges and lawmakers determine what kind of future is possible for all peoples." His insight into how different authority systems shaped frontier development revealed educational depth that prepared young Comanche men for leadership roles in complex intercultural environments. Swift Hawk's understanding of white governance structures complemented Rebecca's growing appreciation for tribal decision-making processes. Their partnership continued, developing through shared labor and mutual education that expanded both participants' capabilities. Each day brought new lessons as Rebecca mastered horse management techniques while Swift Hawk developed understanding of property management and business planning that would serve him throughout adulthood. The construction projects gradually transformed Rebecca's modest homestead into something resembling a proper ranch, with secure corrals, functional work areas, and expanded living quarters that could accommodate additional staff as the operation grew. Swift Hawk's design incorporated both practical efficiency and symbolic elements that honored the horse's Comanche heritage. The central corral's entrance featured carved posts representing thunderbirds whose outstretched wings welcomed horses and humans into partnership that transcended mere ownership. A design element which Swift Hawk explained represented protection and blessing in Comanche tradition, transformed utilitarian structure into statement about the operation's philosophical foundation. These symbols tell the horses that they are valued as partners, not simply possessed as property, Swift Hawk explained as he completed the intricate carvings. They remind humans that true partnership requires respect for the spirit that lives within each animal. The integration of cultural symbolism into practical structures characterized the entire development process, creating an environment that honored both the horse's origins and their new purpose. Swift Hawk's design choices demonstrated understanding that intercultural cooperation worked best when each tradition contributed its unique strengths. As word of Rebecca's extraordinary horses spread throughout the region, unexpected visitors began arriving with increasing frequency. Some came from simple curiosity about reports of exceptional animals given by Indians to a white woman, while others brought serious interest in potential breeding arrangements or purchases that could launch commercial operations. Among the latter was Colonel James Forsyth, representing cavalry procurement interests from Fort Richardson, whose assessment of Rebecca's horses confirmed their exceptional military potential. His professional evaluation provided external validation that matched Swift Hawk's claims about their quality and capabilities. Mrs. Caldwell, Colonel Forsyth said after examining the herd, "These animals exceed military specifications in every category we measure. Their endurance, intelligence, and trainability would make them invaluable for cavalry operations throughout the frontier." The colonel's interest created potential for government contracts that could provide stable financial foundation for expanding operations. Military purchases typically offered premium prices for quality stock, while contracts often included support for breeding programs that maintained desired bloodlines. The Army would be interested in regular supply of animals meeting these standards. Colonel Forsyth continued, his tone shifting from evaluation to negotiation. "We could discuss advance contracts that would guarantee purchase of specified numbers at predetermined prices, providing financial security while you develop your operation." His proposal represented opportunity that extended beyond simple sales to potential partnership with military authorities in developing specialized breeding programs. Such arrangement would provide reliable income, while establishing reputation for quality that could attract additional customers throughout the region. Rebecca's response reflected growing confidence in her understanding of the horses, value and her ability to manage expanding business operations. "Colonel, I appreciate your interest and would welcome further discussion of potential arrangements," she said. "However, I'll need time to develop proper breeding and training programs before considering formal contracts." Her caution impressed Colonel Forsyth, whose experience with horse suppliers had taught him to respect those who prioritized quality development over quick profits. His appreciation for Rebecca's professional approach enhanced military interest in future partnership that could serve both parties' interests. "A wise approach," he acknowledged. "Quality development requires patience and proper foundation. When you're ready to discuss specific arrangements, Fort Richardson would be eager to explore possibilities that could benefit both your operation and our cavalry requirements. The colonel's visit represented a turning point in Rebecca's transition. From accidental recipient of extraordinary gift to intentional developer of commercial breeding operation. External validation from military professionals confirmed the horse's exceptional value while creating opportunities for business development that could transform her circumstances. Swift Hawk's observation of the interaction revealed strategic thinking that anticipated future developments. The military connection could provide protection as well as profits, he noted after Colonel Forsyth's departure. Cavalry officers tend to defend suppliers who provide essential resources for their operations. His insight highlighted political dimensions of potential military contracts that extended beyond simple business arrangements. In frontier environment where intercultural relationships often generated suspicion, military support could provide protection against those who might otherwise target Rebecca's operation for discriminatory treatment. The weeks following Colonel Forsyth's visit brought dramatic changes as Rebecca's vision for developing the horse operation gained clarity and momentum. Swift Hawk's continuing education about Comanche horse management techniques provided foundation for a breeding program that would maintain the animal's exceptional qualities while adapting to settled ranching environment. Their partnership gradually expanded to include members of Swift Hawk's extended family, who arrived in small groups to offer specialized knowledge or labor for specific projects. Each visitor brought unique skills that contributed to developing operation while strengthening intercultural relationships that supported its success. Among the most significant contributions came from Swift Hawk's maternal grandmother, Singing Bird, whose knowledge of horse medicine provided foundation for health management systems that would protect valuable breeding stock from diseases that frequently devastated frontier horse operations. Her traditional remedies, combined with modern veterinary approaches Rebecca learned from Dr. Wilson, created comprehensive health protocols that significantly reduced common risks. Prevention matters more than treatment, Singing Bird explained, while teaching Rebecca to identify plants with medicinal properties. The Comanche way is to strengthen the horse's natural defenses rather than waiting for sickness to develop. Strong horses rarely require medicine if they receive proper care from the beginning. Her philosophy of preventive health management transformed Rebecca's understanding of livestock care, replacing reactive approach typical of frontier operations with proactive systems that maintained wellness through nutrition, exercise, and environmental management. This fundamental shift would eventually distinguish Caldwell horses from competitors throughout the region. Singing Bird's knowledge extended beyond physical health to psychological well-being that maintained the horse's exceptional spirit and intelligence. Her insights into herd dynamics and individual personality development provided foundation for training methods that preserved the animal's natural capabilities while preparing them for productive partnership with humans. A horse that loses its spirit becomes merely a tool, she explained while demonstrating techniques for encouraging natural curiosity without destroying independence. The Comanche way preserves the fire within each animal while directing its energy toward cooperation rather than resistance. This philosophical approach to horse development directly contradicted prevailing frontier methods that emphasized domination rather than partnership. The difference would eventually define Caldwell horses as distinctly superior for applications requiring intelligence and initiative rather than mere obedience. As autumn approached, bringing hints of cooler weather that would eventually break the summer's oppressive heat, Rebecca's homestead had transformed into functioning horse ranch with appropriate facilities for breeding, training, and managing exceptional animals. The original 100 horses had adapted completely to their new environment, thriving under management system that combined the best elements of Comanche tradition and modern ranching practice. Swift Hawk's continuing presence provided bridge between cultures that enabled genuine integration of different knowledge systems, rather than simple substitution of one approach for another. His diplomatic skills facilitated communication between Rebecca and the growing number of Comanche visitors who contributed specialized expertise to developing operation. Most importantly, the partnership had begun generating tangible results that validated Chief Thundercloud's original vision of intercultural cooperation. The first foals produced under Rebecca's management showed exceptional quality that matched or exceeded their parents' characteristics, confirming that proper breeding protocols could maintain the bloodline's special attributes. Colonel Forsyth's return visit in early September brought formal proposal for military purchase agreement that would provide financial foundation for expanding operations. His assessment of the program's development expressed appreciation for the systematic approach Rebecca had implemented with Swift Hawk's assistance. Mrs. Caldwell, the colonel said after reviewing facilities and examining recently born foals, "What you've accomplished in just a few months exceeds expectations in every category. The integration of traditional knowledge with modern practices has produced results that conventional breeding operations would require years to achieve." His recognition of how intercultural cooperation had accelerated development validated Rebecca's decision to embrace partnership with Swift Hawk's people, rather than attempting to manage the horses through conventional methods alone. The unique combination of different knowledge systems had created synergy that produced exceptional results. The Army is prepared to offer a 5-year contract for 20 trained horses annually at premium prices, Colonel Forsyth continued, presenting formal documents that detailed proposed arrangement. Additionally, we would provide supplemental feed during drought periods and veterinary support from Fort Richardson's animal management specialists. The proposed contract represented financial security that would support continued development while creating framework for expansion beyond military markets. Colonel Forsyth's willingness to include support services acknowledged the operation's strategic importance to cavalry interests throughout the territory. Rebecca's response reflected the confidence of someone who understood her operation's value, rather than desperate homesteader grateful for any opportunity. "Colonel, I appreciate your generous offer, and I'm interested in establishing formal relationship with Fort Richardson," she said. "However, I'll need to review specific terms with my partners before making final commitment." Her reference to partners acknowledged the essential contribution of Swift Hawk and his family to the operation's success, establishing public recognition of intercultural cooperation that transcended conventional employment relationships. This declaration of genuine partnership represented significant departure from prevailing frontier attitudes toward Native American participation in business enterprises. Colonel Forsyth's acceptance of this characterization demonstrated flexibility that suggested changing attitudes within military leadership. "Of course," he agreed, "partnership considerations are essential for successful long-term arrangements. We're prepared to work with your entire team to establish mutually beneficial terms." This acknowledgement of Comanche contribution to the enterprise represented significant evolution in military attitudes toward intercultural cooperation. Colonel Forsyth's willingness to recognize Native American partners as legitimate business participants rather than mere laborers suggested institutional openness that contradicted prevailing racial prejudices. As autumn colors began transforming the landscape from summer's faded browns to vibrant golds and reds, Rebecca stood with Swift Hawk watching spirit dancer lead the herd through evening exercises that maintained their exceptional conditioning. The magnificent paint stallion had adapted completely to his new role as foundation sire for breeding program that would eventually transform horse quality throughout the region. "Mrs. Caldwell," Swift Hawk said, his voice carrying mature insight that belied his youth, "my father believes that what we are building here is more important than simply raising excellent horses. He says we are creating example of what becomes possible when different peoples combine their knowledge instead of fighting over whose way is better." The boy's understanding of the operation's broader significance revealed sophisticated perspective that extended beyond Immediate circumstances to long-term implications for intercultural relations. Swift Hawk had apparently absorbed lessons about community leadership that prepared him for future roles beyond simple horse management. "I believe he's right," Rebecca replied, watching as the setting sun transformed the horses' coats into living flame that embodied the spirit chief. Thundercloud had recognized when authorizing the extraordinary gift. What began as simple kindness has become opportunity to demonstrate that cooperation creates possibilities neither community could achieve alone. Their partnership had indeed transcended original circumstances to become model for intercultural relations that challenged prevailing assumptions about racial separation. The successful integration of different knowledge systems demonstrated possibilities that contradicted policies based on assumed incompatibility between Native American and white approaches to economic development. As stars emerged in the clear Texas sky, Rebecca realized that feeding one hungry child had initiated a journey that would transform not only her individual circumstances, but potentially the entire region's approach to intercultural cooperation. The 100 painted horses grazing peacefully in her expanded pastures represented far more than simple wealth or even business opportunity. They embodied promise that different peoples could build something greater together than either could create alone, promise that would eventually reshape the American West through example more powerful than any political proclamation or military victory. The drought that had brought such desperate hardship was finally showing signs of breaking, with evening clouds that promised rain after months of relentless heat. But even if rain never came again, Rebecca knew that her life had been permanently enriched by discovering that kindness could indeed change the world, one hungry child at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.